Good morning, everybody. My name's Scott Nine. I'm the director of IDEA, and I'm joined with Dana Benes.
Hey, how y'all doing?
and
uh, go, go ahead. Continue on, Scott.
and we're doing a full-fledged teaching. By teaching, we mean we're teaching each other, and really having a collaborative work session with everybody who's on. And if you watch the recording and you have access to the document and the showcasing, you can go play in there as well whenever you're listening. We're going to do a quick 5-minute kind of context setting about what this is about, and then we'll dive in. For folks who are live, there's a link in the chat and on the main Google page for the event page that take you all to the virtual Idea Camp notes. Looks like a few folks are there, but if you click over there, if you scroll down to the Teach-In Social Networking and Analysis section, you'll see these notes and a chat, and we're going to actually invite people to actively write and work in that document as we go. So that's where you can have kind of two windows open. One for the live and one for the other one. Oh, I see your joke, Dana. So social networking analysis is the specific thing we're going to learn about, but here's the background. We continually work hard to describe what IDEA is up to and what we think we're doing, and we try to improve at that, be more precise about articulating the ways in which we think our efforts to network and connect people and share stories and tools, what it is and why it's valuable, how the relationships matter, and in the prior session, Josue did a great job in his own words to articulate very much what we hope to be offering to different groups and organizations, but in a way that's mutual. We're certainly learning all the time as well. At the same time, we also know part of our understanding is it can be hard to articulate what an organization like IDEA is doing when we don't have a lot of specific programs or projects. And when we are in the mode of contributing to the success of others or elevating other stories, it can feel a little intangible. Santiago, our board president, said something that was really helpful, which is that we can't make the intangible tangible, but we can make the intangible visible. And he put us on to really beginning to try to learn about a field of social networking analysis and mapping. Now, we've approached mapping in a lot of ways over the years, and it's still an area that we think is core to what we're trying to do, which is how to make the different efforts happening around the country and in Puerto Rico visible and how they relate to each other. Social networking analysis is a specific approach to doing that we're kind of new to learning about 4 or 5 months into, and we wanted to dig into that a little bit. We were challenged by one foundation to boil what IDEA does down into one single product, and share it as a way of trying to be provocative. We said IDEA's product is social capital, the development of social networks and relationships that inform, infuse, and can spur a larger movement for democratic education, and that this product strengthens the capacity of young people, educators, schools, and change makers to be effective leaders for educational transformation. So the question then is, what does that actually look like? Well, how do you show creating social capital? How do you show growth of networks? How do you show infusion and contribution and not, kind of co-opting or taking credit for things? And so I'm gonna turn it over to Dana to give a very quick review of social network analysis and some tools, and then we're literally going to just dive into this conversation and invite everybody to unmute and ask questions, share links, and dilemmas as we try to think through it together. So Dana, what do you got?
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. So yeah, so my work both as with IDEA as director of what is my title again? We're changing it, but as Chief Learning Officer, as the title rings now. So both of my work kind of thinking about broadly about how do we learn together as a network and as a kind of movement and kind of make sense out of it. And also locally here, so I live in Minnesota, and often the question, when working with the Minnesota team, we're just having conversations with a lot of people. Anytime the idea about mapping comes up, or the need to really understand who is out there and what the relationships are, everyone is excited and is like, yes, this is the need. But how do we do it? What are the ways to do it? And there are different ways, and this is not the one answer. And in fact, I think this combined with other ways of kind of landscape mapping of who are the people and places and kind of networking out that way. But this is really another tool to actually take it to another level of the idea of social network analysis, as we've been learning, and we're no experts, but just kind of seeing the potential for it to actually help to visibly see. So actually, part of what social network analysis is that it's actually the creating of visual webs and maps that map out who is connected to who and how strong are those relationships. So we have some links here to dive deeper into social network analysis, and we want you, hopefully, please, you're in this document. Check out these links. Google, you can Google things on your own to search for more, and can kind of have this as a shared learning time together. Because we're really not experts on this, but we clipped in there a couple kind of quotes and some other links about social network analysis. So again, it's really the idea that we all live in networks. Certainly, we know that the idea of a social network is, I think, much more it's pervasive these days. But the idea of actually analyzing and thinking about how do we live and function within a network. If you think about your network, there's actually certain people you're certainly more closer connected to, and then others you're further connected to. And then if you think even further, you might think, well, I'm connected to this one person here, and then that person is connected to a ton of people over there. And I don't have a direct link to that other big network, but I do have a link to the person right here. So it's an actual way of visualizing this out on multiple levels. And so some of these tools then that we've linked in here are software that does this. And so the way that they often will work is that they'll start with a question. First of all, like, who is in your network? And you can, there are different ways to do it, but you can upload spreadsheets of your contacts. There's even one of these tools, I think it's Wolfram Alpha. They all have really fun names. Wolfram Alpha, I think, is the one that you can put in your Facebook account. Of course, it's always dangerous to do this kind of stuff, but you put in your Facebook account and it'll map out like a map of your own network. And I've done that. I think, Scott, you did that too, actually.
I did, just as an experiment to understand how it works.
Yeah, and it's pretty fun. It's pretty funny. Kind of it just shows you that, and the tools work differently, but some of them that are really high functioning, I would say, seem to you can zoom in and you can actually see the people who are connected. There might be lines between different people might be larger if those are stronger connections, or they'll actually be visibly closer in the kind of map that it shows. And again, some of the most interesting things are the ways that we see, like, wow, I have an entire network over here, but I'm only connected to them through them to one person. Things like that. So when we think about idea and our work together in building movement and in building these relationships, it's actually can be really helpful to think about who those connections are, and you start to realize, wow, that person right there, that connection is hugely valuable, because there's no other way to get into that next layer of relationships except for that person. So it one shows that could be a really valuable person, and it also shows, wait a second, maybe we can build other connections to that group as well to kind of flesh out the network. So, yeah, Scott.
Well, just to add one thing on that, so there's a way in which it helps visualize the current network you're in and what those linkages, the strengths, and where you have these kind of, I think they use in the technical literature, they call them gatekeepers, folks that are channels into next networks. But there's also a way of just showing the organic growth of your effort. So to use an example, since when Santiago first presented it, the idea was if we could go back 5 years from now and take the first circle of relationships that IDEA had in, let's say, Vermont as an example. We could do this in any place. And then say, okay, who is connected to who and what were their types of relationships? And of course, the tricky part in this, and one of the questions I have, is who gets to decide to assign what value to the relationship? So in the analysis of the network, if you say you're strongly connected, or lightly connected, who gets to pick? So that's a dilemma to come back to. But you make that initial map, and some of the software provides surveys so that people are self-assessing their net. And then you're able to say, okay, 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and you can watch that network grow and who gets connected and how, and in a sense it tells visually a story of how a network grows. And then you can also look at the kind of potency of the relationships. And so the thinking here is, if you value relationships and networking and you think that there is an emerging movement and you can show that over time you're growing a network and certain relationships are getting stronger, you can make visually a kind of like, beginning, middle, and end story. Not that it's an end, but you can show that development, and that doing that over time in a particular place, then thinking about how different places add up, and then how that adds up to a higher level map. So there's a way of documenting an unfolding story that can give credit to what we're doing. Then a different aspect is, how does that knowledge actually become directly useful? So how does the same map become an actual actor? So as I see those connections, then if I'm, for instance, on the prior call about place-based organizing strategy, if I can see the visual connections that another team has made and I need access to those same circles, how do I use that relationship pathway to actually advance my work, which is a different goal. Right, so these are the things that we're unwinding and thinking about, and we want to really kind of approach the conversation from here in a way to kind of, now that we've kind of cracked it open a little bit, we're literally want to we're puzzling out loud through this. So Dana and I are going to kind of flip from introducing it to talking through it, and we hope anyone else will just jump in with questions or chats or their own insights about what could this look like, if you know of other tools, if you have provocative questions about the pros and cons or limits. And quick side note on the scary Wolfram Alpha thing, you should note, there's a real, it's an interesting tool because it can illuminate, but it's not actually a social networking analysis tool in terms of what these other two main kind of things are that Dana's linked in here. It's more of it's an amazing little website that does all kinds of crazy things about the universe. I don't know that it takes your contacts in or anything like that. I'm not sure it's something dangerous, but you can.
No, it's not. I was just
go check it out. It does sound kind of scary.
I was just being funny about that, but
yeah. So Dana, I had a question I wanted to ask you, legitimately, as a way of thinking through it in a way that might dive us in and flip gears into working on it out loud. If you could take a step back to take all the insights and relationships that have happened over 5 or 6 years, or you could go all the way back to whatever, 2003, but you take all of that in and then you look at these tools. And if you have the resources, and I realize that's a big variable, but if you had the resources, how might you, from the start, try to use these ideas, on the application level, what might you try to put in place from the very beginning as a way to do this, or would you? That's the question I was thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm still learning a lot. So I mean, my thoughts are kind of based on maybe half knowledge about the potential of this kind of software and this approach. But I think for me, I guess I would say, first of all, on the broad scale, there's the kind of national broad level potential of it. And so I think in the sense of it's not just idea. I mean, it would be more exciting for me actually to build to create. I would say if we had ability to design software and create surveys, really, because I think it's got to be about getting in information from people, and so do a kind of a survey that goes across networks to different organizations and networks involved in this movement for educational change, and try and survey, who are the people you're closest with, what kind of relationship do you have with them? Are you a kind of a supporter or a mentor or an ally, or do you call them, once a year maybe, or once a month, or once a week? Kind of those kinds of questions, and then ask that of a really broad national kind of network of folks. You could really start to build and see where the relationships are currently, and then that has a bunch of different implications, I think, just to kind of the snapshot of it. But then the other one is the growth over time, and so the ability to do something like this, let's say 1 year, and then a few years later of work, to do it again and to show how things are growing and changing and what are the inputs that are actually leading to that change. So on the national level, I'd say some of that stuff. But I think almost that could be replicated or used in the same way locally, and that's even more exciting in some ways. In the sense of that, I think it's a little more tangible when you think about, let's say, Puerto Rico specifically, or Jackson, Mississippi, or the state of Minnesota, and then kind of in a local way, and that's when you can really, and it can be used by organizers, by teams of folks, by networks, by partners to kind of use a tool as a way, again, to create either snapshots or growth that could both be ways of helping them learn about what are the kinds of relationship building work that actually leads to some change on the ground and not just, oh, and now I know you. So I think that's the practical result that I'd love to see from it.
So stick on that for just a second, and then and other people maybe can answer this too. So if we what I'm thinking about is like when Gallup or Pew or other people do surveys, one of the challenges of their methodology is that they're inflexible and they don't change a lot their methodology on their core set of questions. They change all the time the like politics of the moment questions, but they're kind of core based questions. They don't tinker with those models lightly. And the reason that they don't is because they want to be able to compare over the course of years, and they want to be able to see changes in trends. So a little bit of structure and inflexibility gives you a level of analysis that's different than when everybody can customize. So you have this tool that locally, people might want to language in different ways or want to assess different things. But if you're trying to aggregate for an emerging movement nationally, you almost need a kind of somewhat inflexible structure for a period of time to be able to get enough view. And so if you had to be really precise and you had to pick just a handful of questions, and you did that taking ideas cause statement around an emerging political movement, you took the kind of, you didn't care so much about democratic education as a set of word set, but you took the kind of values and you took the relationship that maybe that idea currently has. And you'd say you could get every network and everybody who's a degree or two away from idea to all complete 4 or 5 questions. Like, what would those 4 or 5 questions be that you think could help make a good visible map that you could then a year later people would redo it or add to it and you'd see change? Like, I wonder how people would think about that.
Yeah.
Crystal, I don't know what BRB stands for, but teach me.
I think she's saying be right back.
Oh, hey, look at that. I learned new internet stuff. Okay, so anybody who's on the call, and I'm going to do my own noodling as well, but what do people think in terms of questions?
Yeah, and folks who are there, you can, there's multiple ways. If you're live with us, you can put in the group chat on the side. If you're watching the video, you can click the Q&A box. If you're in our document, the notes document, you can put it in the chat bar there, or just
type right into the document.
Drop right into the document itself.
Yeah. So like when I look at the Socializer, one of the things, although I know that's a little bit more kind of businessy in terms of things, but one of the things that I'm attracted to about it is its simplicity. And I really love their language around connectors, bridge builders, bottlenecks, and influencers. And I know all that's backed in a bunch of research, but I find it really useful. I also think looking at clusters and silos is interesting. And I was trying to think about some of our earlier efforts with mapping and supporting other groups, and so what would be the actual questions that would be genuinely helpful? And so anyway, what do you think? And I'm going to try to do some drafting on my own while I listen.
Yeah. So what comes out to me first, I guess, is just the basic question. If we're thinking about educational actors and change agents. I mean, so for me, it's, I guess right away is who is most essential to your change efforts. That would be kind of the beginning question. And then I think you kind of dive in deeper into a question, because then you want to find out the level and extent of these kinds of relationships. So you want to say for each of those people, maybe one to 6 how important are they to you? Another question would be kind of that frequency question, I think, of how frequently are you in touch with this person? Um, I think it would be, and then I think that we want a way to kind of track the kinds of relationships. So maybe I'm picturing a map that has different colors or something, or visuals or designs or graphics. So, is this an ally? Is this a mentor? Is this a person who just is a connector for you to another network? Um, is this someone you go to for policy support? Is this, things like that? So trying to kind of nail down, you know, the value of a relationship and the frequency of the connection, I think, or and then the kind of the roles that the people are playing. I think that's a beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm thinking about these questions around, like, how often do you seek advice from this person or group? Um, uh, is this a group you look to for helping promote your work, or you want them to be, you'd want them to promote your work, which would get you to a sense of, like, you see them as being someone who can kind of help broker or amplify your efforts. Who do you go to for getting a pulse on what's going on? Which is, there's this language around influencers and pulse takers. And there's this, one of the questions I have is the difference between perceived influence and actual influence, because I wonder about that and how you break that down. And then probably the biggest, in order to get to questions where I'm stuck at, is, in order for this to work well, does it require people loading in individual contacts? And so, like, at its most, like, basic level, if we said, to, let's say, to Skip and Nikki and Jackson and the Jackson team, okay, we want to get a sense of what is your current network. So Chuck, Albert, folks, Jed, they have their first, like, direct contacts, and they have a ton of them, right? Like, I would imagine,
Yeah.
like, just amongst that small crew, we're talking hundreds of contacts in Jackson at various degrees of political influence, educational influence, who they get advice from, who they work with politically. And then, of course, there's this, my brain goes to the, once you even make that visible, would that have to be held really closely, because that map is really useful knowledge, but it's also got kind of political damage inside of its transparency, right? So,
Mhm.
like, there's a real question I have about, for it to be a good, honest mapping. But do they fundamentally, to get a good map, have to put in the names of the people, to get them? And then you could map differently. You could not map on individuals. You could map around groups as a unit,
Yeah.
but you'd get something different by mapping groups as opposed to people.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
so this doesn't answer questions. It's just my thinking out loud. Other people who are on this call, questions you've thought of, or as you hear the conversation, what has it got you thinking about? Either you're all on mute or we have left the building.
One question I have, Scott. This is Heath.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
thank you all for having this. This to me is like a community college for your week of virtual camp. And I heard that on a TED Talk they talked about being able to share practices and creating sort of a neighborhood community college. And I think you all are putting a new brand to that, and that's very cool. Um, so I wanted to ask about, you mentioned, who do they go to for advice? Who does a given group go to for advice? But I think it could be asked the other way around too. Who comes to them for advice? Who are those little people
Hmm.
and little pockets and pieces who come to them for advice, even if it's informal? I think that's very,
That's good.
very telling as well.
Yeah. Well, and you could keep going with that. Not just who comes to them for advice, but all the questions work both directions, right? So, like, who comes to them for promotion, right? Who comes for them for bridge building, or to be a broker, to someone else. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting. I think if you were asked that, it kind of leads to a question about direction, like direction in a map. Is it going one way, or is it kind of a multi-directional relationship? And I think you probably could like visually show that with arrows. And if is it a mutual trust kind of a relationship, or is it kind of one way there, or what?
Jeanette, explain your confusey face, because you're on video and I can see you, and that's the face of what? So say what's going on in your brain.
I forgot I didn't turn my video off.
Busted.
I was trying to figure out where to put my Facebook stuff in. Wolfram Alpha. I couldn't figure it out.
Google Wolfram Alpha Facebook, because there's a Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha is this like you can put in like any word and it'll do all these crazy things.
The link's in there, so.
But there's a specific thing you do to put your Facebook into it.
Yeah, I think I finally found it on their page. But
so you weren't puzzling over this conversation. You were just like, how do I get my analysis of my Facebook network?
I was trying to see how my connections could help idea. That's what I was trying to do.
The challenge. Oh, go ahead.
I was still listening to the conversation.
Yeah, no, I saw your puzzled face. I thought it was about where we were. So the thing about the Wolfram Alpha is it will analyze your Facebook network, but it doesn't allow you to. It does that as a flat snapshot with no analysis, right? So it won't help you vet. It doesn't allow you to slice it up or say, what's in what pile. It just tells you the people, right?
Right.
But it does give you a sense of what that visual networking looks like. So that's useful just because it lets you look at your own network and begin to get this idea in your head around what it can illuminate. Dana and I were we went to some event Adam Burke invited us to, the Business Innovation Factory, and one of the I didn't realize this is the kind of software he was using, but I'm sure it was. A researcher there had done a analysis of everyone's Twitter feeds for the entire 200-person gathering, and then he presented it like on a giant screen and could identify who in the room, like he suggested who should be talking to each other to advance their, like it was really kind of crazy and really interesting, and they had printed maps for everyone so that you could find each other, and I was stumped on how he could ever have done it, and I think
it's a good example. You actually, and what was, I mean, it was live, so Scott and Adam and I were all on that map, and that he put up there and that distributed, and it was interesting because we were kind of, so it actually represented it really well. We were peripheral to this group. We were given an invitation from one of the organizers, but because that person knew Adam, and then Adam knew us, so it was kind of a couple of steps of away. But so for the most people in this network, they all knew each other. They'd gone to, there were 8 of these gatherings before. They've gone to all of them. They're a tight network. So it was really dense, like right in the middle, all these connections. And then there were a few outliers, and one of them was us. And so there was a connection, and it went to Adam Burke. And then Adam went to me and to Scott, and we were connected all with each other, but all on the kind of very corner of the map. And so it was really fascinating, and I haven't thought about it until now, but that's an example of and so in that kind of a relation, you could say so the relationship then to Adam, who is a connector into us as well, and us then into all the idea network, let's say, or educational change work, kind of that was a really pretty valuable connection, and so that's the kind of thing that you can see in this kind of an analysis.
Okay, so back to this. We've got this bidirectionality of questions, which I think is really helpful. And we've got this idea around certain kinds of questions that would give us a sense of the different contexts of the relationship. How do you think about, Dana, to use idea language around curating criteria? If I'm an organization and I get the survey, first of all, it's going to be a big effort for me to participate. So why would I participate? Which I think probably is that if I get given back a good network map, that my contribution is that I'm going to get back something that's going to advance my work and make it useful and make visually interesting to me, and you're going to do that work for me. So that's why I would cooperate, and I buy this idea of making an emerging movement visible. But people have very different choices around who they consider to be their allies or in partners, right? We haven't all, it's not like there's like an agreement around an emerging movement is about many networks with many edges, and it's not that everyone's on the same. Maybe people will agree on 80% of the things, but who people would map, the way they look at those relationships, and what's different between this network analysis, which is actual relationships, right? So part of the network analysis is it's not your when we've done mapping before, we'll ask people who are the 5 most powerful organizations in the national landscape, and who are the 5 organizations you most would like to work with, and you get these gaps between people's perception of who's powerful and who their relationships and reach are, but that's not tied to who they're related to. It's tied to their reader analysis. The social, this is helping me think through it out loud in my head. So the social networking analysis is actually limited only to who you have relationships with. It doesn't allow you to say, I think Gates is a giant thing, but I have no connection to them. It's just like I have this relationship. But how do people just put all of their relationships in, and then do they analyze all around the coherence of how aligned they are? Like, do you ask questions about how aligned is one of the questions about how aligned their work is to to these same people, so that you can toggle on an alignment thing? Or like, how do people decide who goes in their grid, right? Do I put all of my friends and family, or do I only put my how close or how broad is the circle that I want to input into this?
Right. I think it's gotta be based on what the goal is. So I think this conversation is making me kind of more clear that when we're doing this, we've got to have a really clear goal for what we're trying to get at, and that'll really frame it, and it'll be clear what kinds of questions that we're asking and what kinds of people we want people to or organizations to be adding into or responding to with the questions. But I think the questions will be some of them should be pretty self-explanatory, I think, in terms of getting at that. I mean, I just found I was doing some Googling on, questions in a social network analysis, and here's one list, and it says, who do you typically turn to for help in thinking through a new or challenging problem? Who are you likely to turn to discuss a new or innovative idea? Who do you typically give work-related information? Who do you typically give work-related information to? Who do you turn to for input prior to making an important decision? Who do you feel has contributed to your professional growth and development? And who do you trust to keep your best interests in mind? So that's a very specific, you could say, like that clearly is a goal maybe of a very inner functioning network of people. Maybe not. It could be very related to educational change work as well in some ways. And so I think those questions are going to be the answer. So obviously I'm not going to, I think we frame it by saying we're talking about educational change work, so I'm not going to say, well, I call my aunt when because I'm talking about advice for my personal issues. So it's going to be clear that way. Although that could be interesting to map out as well, potentially our own personal relationships with our family. But I think it'll be pretty clear that we're orienting by the goal and the kinds of questions that we ask.
I'm on a different site, and I found something similar. They break their analysis into 2 types of questions. So one type they call relationship questions. So this just indicates whether a tie exists or not. And so this is, who do you go to for advice? Who's your immediate manager or point of contact? And they use different words to kind of capture a sense of role relationship within an organization. Who's part of your team or group? Which would be interesting, because that doesn't have to be tied to organizational things, but like, who's your circle, basically. Then those are relationship questions. They have more, but that's the gist of it. And then they have rating questions, which is the level of interaction. So one of the ones that seems real simple is just, how often do you work with this person? Yeah. How often do you seek help? Would you be able to see improvement or growth in your efforts if you had more contact with these people? And what extent do these people do the same job you do? Which in its education parallel would be really quite interesting, right? Who do you perceive is doing the same work you are, or something similar?
Yeah, it seems to me that I think, and this is something we've talked about a bit in over the years, I'd say, and lots of others have too, but a lot of times we're very, and those working in educational change, let's say, I think can get really focused on the work that you're doing right now and the work that and the relationships that we have, without realizing that, you know, there might be this other kind of network right here that's doing something really parallel, really similar. And maybe if we knew more about each other and how our relationships overlap, or how our work overlaps, we could actually combine efforts in a really exciting way. And so I think one of the goals for this kind of analysis for me is for the various networks and groups and organizations and organizers involved in this work to realize the connections that we all have and to start to use them more strategically than we are right now.
A different way to think about it too, from a kind of strength-based tip, is that people are working all those things. I mean, yes, we can be stronger and better and more collaborative, but people also are, and sometimes in very rapid bursts, and sometimes over sustained campaigns. But our ability to articulate and defend that value and to give it credence, whether that's to foundations or to individual funders, to ourselves or to government entities. But by being able to map these things, you're able to make tangible. You can make visible something that can be valued, right? So community organizing in particular has gone through a little bit of a disinvestment period from foundations, and I think part of that is because it's hard to show kind of like the tangible outcome of the ways that what's great about organizing efforts. And if partly contributing to this is to help it be visible to people, to in a sense give credence to the work being done, I think that would be a powerful motivator for folks. To flip down for a minute and push ourselves a little bit with not much time left, if we wanted to start really small, but we wanted to try this out, and we picked a spot to do it with, or we had some partners who say, yeah, we want to try this out, or whether it was just, IDEA did it in some way within, even just at the staff level, but what would be the smallest way we could start that we think would get an early yield, and how might we figure out a way to show growth over time? So in other words, any thoughts, or have you found any research? And I've been trying to poke around and I haven't. What I'm most interested in personally is not just the snapshot, but the growth over time. So I want to be able to see how something at one snapshot moment looks different 6 months later, and to be able to look at how that network changes. Because ideally, what you're hoping for is to see, kind of growth and change and connection. And I wonder how, not just the first set of baseline questions, but then how do you keep it monitored or updated? So kind of how would we start really small? What would that look like? And how could we update it in 6 months in a way that would show us this change as a kind of rapid prototype test of this? Any thoughts around that for anybody? And then we, puzzle that out a little bit, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. Jeanette, what do you think? You are probably one of the more savvy actual social networkers in terms of your online relationship set of networks, and you also, I think, come at it, you can sometimes kind of pull some clarity through complex lines. What do you hear in this? Any ideas you have?
I'm still trying to process it all, and I'm fascinated by the tools, and I think that's where, I get trapped in that, like, how do these tools work before I can process, like, how we might use them. Capacity is a bit, I think when I think about all of our networks and how we use them, I don't think that we're always using our networks to the best of our, maybe the best, I don't know what I'm even saying, the best of our ability, but maybe we don't use them in the most productive of ways, most beneficial to our organization and the work we're doing, but maybe that's because we don't see how they're tied to each other. And I find, and I know, when you say that I'm the most social savvy or whatever, but my personal network, and I have rules like around my personal network and how I network with people on Twitter, Facebook, etc., who gets in and who doesn't get in. And it's interesting because I was just looking at the Facebook report on the Wolfram thing, and it's interesting to see the clusters of my different sections of the different types of activism I do, and kind of where a few people are trickling up and down between the two different. Those are connections that are interesting to me. Like, I will look at those and I'll be like, okay, how can I pull some of those people that look really close to this education activism I do down a little closer, right? And how can I get some of those other people to trickle up into the other activism work I do? And I don't know if that's the way to approach it. You know, we look at individual networks, we look at our joint social network, and we figure out how to pull in kind of these loose ends. I don't know if I'm answering your questions. I'm kind of rambling at the moment.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's interesting.
It's a lot.
But I think it's interesting to pull in. Like, I was just looking at, like, who I know through Scott 9, and there's some interesting connections in different, and this is just a quick glance at all of that data that it just pulled, but like how they're connected, even though I know them, and they, according to this report, it says I'm connected to them through Scott 9. It's like, but I don't know them through Scott 9, so it's a little weird. And so I think, like, how do you make sense of those connections, and how do you best use those connections? And I think that's what you're asking, and I don't know the answer. For me, it's about looking at those connections and figuring that out a little more in depth, and I think it's something we need to do. I have no doubt that it's something that we need to do, that we need to better learn how to capitalize on our social economy, so to speak. And that's my rambling for the day.
Mm-hmm.
To
Crystal,
have not answered a single one of your questions.
No, that's fine.
Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate you diving in. Crystal, what are you thinking? And as you share what you're thinking, if you'd add in, if you're just a place, if you're a place-based team, why or how? Not that you can speak for other people, but just what's your own sense of, like, how would this be valuable? You know, what would make it? I guess really, what would make it helpful or valuable to put time and energy into? What would draw me to it without it being, too big of an effort?
First, like I didn't mean to interrupt you, Jeanette, but I thought I was on mute, but I was like, it's a lot. And especially just being and thinking about where I am now, Jackson, the network is just, like you said, it's crazy. You have individual, networking, and then group networking, and then even when we were at, Freedom Summer, just looking at those different types of relationships, like what organization knows what organization versus what individual knows someone in that organization, but doesn't necessarily, the relationship isn't, vice versa. But I think, like you said, I can't speak for the individual place-based teams, but I think social networking would definitely be an asset to the teams, especially with whatever their project is that they're working on or what they're focusing on. Speaking again I'll speak, use a different team, Minnesota. I'll speak for you, Dana. So, like, for the Minnesota team, I know one of the things that they're focusing on and emphasizing is, developing a youth group or developing a youth team. And with that, of course, they have the youth that they, work with, but then thinking about those youth in their networks and, who they know or who else they're connected with, what groups of youth are affiliated with other groups of youth and how they can, more collectively work together, is definitely, to me, a building tool. And will definitely be beneficial to any work. But like Jeanette said, like, there's different levels to different, there's different levels of engagement. So for me, it's like just thinking about the questions that Dana was asking, like, well, who would you go to for, to when you need help with personal decisions? Who would you go with to when you need help with job decisions? Things like that. That all plays into that social network as well. Because whereas, for example, I could probably talk to Natalia about something that I'm inquiring about, although we're in the same network, I may get a different response than someone like Sean or Husto, who may have known her longer. So all of that plays into the wide web of social networking. So I definitely think it's, essential and would be beneficial to the work, but it's just about like the actual analysis and figuring out, what aspects of it to pull into the work is
I just got a crazy idea that I want to pitch, and then it would be interesting to pull back and look at our larger cause statement and say, in trying to cause an engaged, energized, informed majority clear about the role of education in just society and the kind of tools to provide that, where does social networking analysis fit into that? If it does, how? But I just had this thought, like, as you were talking, Crystal, and you thought about who would you go to for things. Of course, maybe I'd go to Sean for fashion. I'd certainly go to I'd certainly go to Skip for a good hairdo. But thinking about the 4 drivers, right? So if I want information about best practice, like, who do I go to? If I want information about policy, who do I go to? If I want information about public narrative, who do I go to? If I want information about strategy, who do I go to? Individuals and groups. And getting that from each local group and different networks and then nationally would be really fascinating. It would provide a treasure trove of resources and information for people that could be really helpful really fast. And then I had this kind of fun thought. What if at the Learning Breakthrough series, if we took this conversation and we tried to just rapidly put together a very small questionnaire that we asked everyone to fill out, which I say small knowing that realistically it would take some time for people to fill out and put in all the names and stuff. But if we asked people to do it and then post LBS, we were able to enter all that information back and provide a visible view of the network amongst the groups. Within LBS, that would link all the place-based teams with these couple other networks around this analysis, and it'd give us a quick kind of micro test of its usefulness, because we could hear back from all the teams around the extent to which it's useful. It'd give us it's a point of contact we have coming soon. So interested in anybody's thoughts about that, then we should.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, Scott, like just to add another layer of complexity to it, not that it needs any more. Is in thinking about the 4 drivers, for example, like for me, let's just say policy, whereas I may look to, I'm trying to think.
Maya Rockymore.
Yeah, Maya Rockymore. I'm one of the national fellows for, policy expertise. Someone else may think that, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think with the social network analysis, it's going to vary by individual. So, like, for practice, okay, Swag Academy at Tougaloo, or the work that Ophir is doing at the community center that he works at, whereas somebody may look to them for strategy versus the actual, you know what I'm saying? So it would vary, per folks. But it would be interesting to see what people, pull in as, what they deem as, the biggest connector for them over that particular driver.
And I think part of it is that's the greatness of it, the fact that you can have different answers to different things, and you can get those crossovers and intersections, and yeah, people are going to say different things, and I think that's the value to both pay attention to maybe outliers. Maybe there's only one person who says one person, but that could be a really strong connection. So that's just as important as someone else who is, by 85% of the people, let's say, of a survey referenced as someone they go to for this kind of question. Like, that's really valuable too. But, I think a questionnaire for, in terms of idea purposes at LBS, something would be pretty exciting as a way to kind of prototype, test it off. I was just thinking one other thought in general, just overall, as other folks were talking and I was doing some more Googling too, something came up and I was like, oh yeah. And it was talking about kind of I think it was talking about tracking the growth of Twitter over time or something, and it made me realize Um, you know, that as we're engaged also in campaigns. So if you think of something like Mission Hill, like imagine mapping out the relationships and connections that led to Mission Hill being really a year Mission Hill being shared really, you know, well and effectively across multiple networks. And if there was a way to graph that, like, wow, the learning from that, in addition to the learning that we already know anecdotally through it, would be incredibly valuable. So I was thinking about, you know, as we go forward, specific campaigns, maybe trying to have a questionnaire either even before or during or after to try and track that. And yeah, and then the only other thought is if someone is on this call and happens to be a social network analyst, please donate your time, and we will thank you very much.
That's a good place to stop. Like any good teaching, I think we got more questions and dug in without necessarily finishing answers. And Crystal, I'm turning it over to you to share whatever's coming next. Thanks everybody for engaging.
All right, thanks Scott and Dana for taking us on that ride about social network analysis. Great teaching and work in. I'll say that because I think we worked through a lot of that together. Next up, we have our open air hangout in about 7 minutes. If you are interested in joining us there, feel free to do so. We will add the video link to the event page so that you can hop on. And if you can't, feel free to join us later on this afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern as we continue our day of virtual idea camp. Have a good one.